Introduce Russ Wegner.
Hello, I'm Russ Wegner here. Let me see if I'm on speaker. Got my video is on. Erica, am I okay on the video?
Yep, you sound good and you look good.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for being here, everyone. I moved up to Camas, Vancouver about 13 years ago. I'd been a home brewer and I wanted to continue home brewing, and I was determined to grow my own hops. So I built a hop trellis, and I've been through some trials and tribulations, and it's now, I would say, about 13 years later, and I've got some things that I can share with everyone. And I also want to mention I've taken advanced homebrew classes with Bader Beer and Wine, who is in Vancouver, and a great resource for homebrewing and distilling and wines. So first, let's go and next slide. There we go. So we all know the Latin name, of course, the Humulus lupulus. I'm sure Erica can correct me if my pronunciation is not great, but the hops are a rhizome. They're a root cutting of the hop vine. A lot of folks think that it's a vine, but it's actually called a bine with a B. And a hop vine has a short, stiff hair to climb, unlike a vine uses tendrils to climb, and tendrils are smooth. And hop with the hairs can create an itchiness. So hence, when you're dealing with hops, you might want to wear long sleeves and watch out for some reaction to that irritation of the hairs. They're deciduous. The leaves fall off. They're perennial, and they grow in a clockwise direction, and they're very vigorous growing. Someone asked me, a friend of mine the other day, why clockwise? I said, I don't quite know, but that's my understanding. I don't know if you go south of the equator, if they go counterclockwise, but up here, they're clockwise. Anyway, the primary use is for bittering and aroma in beer making. There are other uses for hops, and we'll talk about that later. And it's a very attractive plant. And let's see here. So the hop flowers are called cones, and that's important to remember. And there's a the derivation is from an Anglo-Saxon word hoppen, to climb. Okay, next slide. So the hop plant, dioecious, if I pronounce it correct, it means it's either male or female. And we'll talk later, but only the female is used for beer making. And you do the propagation of hops via the cuttings. And after the harvest, you will cut it down to the rootstock. Oops. And you'll...
Russ, I'm sorry. It seems to be moving itself.
You're on play. It's playing itself. It's okay.
Yeah.
We'll keep up. I'll try and keep up. Anyways, okay, so use a female for beer make propagation via the cuttings. After the harvest, you cut it down almost to the ground, and each year they come back. So it's pretty cool. You're completely done. You'll see some pictures how I cut it to the ground, and you see this picture on the left. Here's my hop and its full hop trellis in its full glory with major amounts of hops, and you'll see how it disappears after the harvest. So the varieties of hops are two types of categories. It's commonly broken into for aroma and bittering. The aroma is used at the end of brewing, and the bittering is during the boil when you're doing a wort, which is a batch of beer you're making. And so you do the bittering at a boil, and the aroma when I brew is just without any heat, and you put that in at the end for the wonderful aroma you can get from your beer. Some aroma varieties include Willamette, Cascade, and Mount Hood. A bittering variety is Chinook, Columbus, Tomahawk, Zeus, and there's many others. Okay, next slide. Is it going? Here we go. Okay, I got some fun facts for you. Their hops are very sensitive to daylight. They produce in 35 to 55 degree latitude. Yakima is 46-degree latitude. We live in a very special place, being in Washington State, for hops. We have the climate where we have a long summer day. We have 15 and a half hours of daylight on a long summer day, and that is ideal for hop growing, in that it's the warmest area that still allows the hops to get their 120 days of warm weather. And we also are in an area where we have the largest hop producing state with 80 million pounds annually, 73% of the U.S. production. The U.S. produces 110 million pounds per year, and a hop plant can live 25 years. That picture on the right is a nice mountains of hops, which I thought I'd share. Okay. So hops like full sun, a lot of water. You do the, whoops, here we go back. You do the original planting in spring after the last frost. This is for the first planting. You harvest in early fall. Like I said, it's a perennial, and it does like the winter chilling of a climate that has a chilling for a good perennial. After a 4-month growing season, it's August, September for harvest. And after you're done harvesting, you want to bury the rootstock in 4 to 6 inches of mulch to protect it somewhat. And then you can uncover it in the spring after the last frost. Okay. So some more on growing and care. During the first year, you do nothing, basically. Yeah, you want to do no pruning, maybe take a few cones, let it do its thing at that first year. The second year is when you actually start to get some activity you want to for keeper hops. And you will prune the first shoots to about 2 feet tall. And then you do 2 strings per plant, and you do trainings at 15-day intervals to get them to go clockwise. You don't want them overcrowded. And then as they grow, they go to 20 feet. And that's the cones will actually develop at the higher point of the vine. And you'll see the cones at the 20 feet mark, and they'll be at mostly in the taller part of the plant. You can fertilize them with a 16-16-16 fertilizer, or you can go organic. You can do that at the first sprout. 3 weeks, every 3 weeks, you can give them food, but you want to stop in midsummer when the heat kicks in, so you're not giving them fertilizer during any high heat, of course. You want them to dry out between the waterings, and hops like a lot of water. They can take up to 6 gallons of water per day to plant. Okay. There we go. Here is a picture of some hops that are just starting to develop the cones. They look like little puffballs. And that is my hop trellis in the back when it's just starting to climb. And that's you'll see later, I'm going to mention that they go 12 inches a day. So they really are vigorous climbers. Okay, we're ready for the next slide. All right, pests and disease for hops. Aphids is something you want to watch for. You spray aphids into a strong stream of water to dislodge them and knock them out, or use insectal soap. Powdery mildew is something to watch out for. You can use hop varieties that are resistant to powdery mildew, such as Cascade and Crystal. Little side story on the picture here. We have ladybug larvae on the top left with the ladybug on the right. I had a situation with ladybug larvae on my hops, and I did not know what ladybug larvae at the time, many years ago, even though I was still learning my master gardening, and I learned that that was the larvae and leave those alone so they could eat my aphids. Luckily, I did my homework as a good master gardener, and I left the larvae alone, and they became the ladybug, and it was great. There's another buddy of mine, frogs we get a lot, and they're also helpful for the pests. Okay. Structures for the hops. Got some notes on that. We they like to be planted in the ground or potted. They are planted 3 to 6 rhizomes horizontally, 2 to 4 inches deep with shoot footings upward. You want to place these clumps 3 to 5 feet apart, not too tight. They like to grow vertically. As I mentioned earlier, people do grow them horizontally. You can do that, but they're basically happy to go vertically to that 18 to 20 feet. You want to plan for climbing. We're going to talk a little bit more about the trellis situations, but you want to have things like arbors, fence, something that they can climb on a good trellis, and you need that full sun for 6 to 8 hours a day. At 1 to 2 feet tall, you train those hops so they climb. We talked about that earlier, how you train for climbing, but they need a little help at the beginning. They can, as I mentioned, go 12 inches a day. So you can come about every day and see them a foot taller. And then they get to that 20 feet, and then it becomes a very thick wall, as you saw in the picture of my hops, and you'll see some more pictures. So you do need a very strong structure. I went through a situation on my personal hop trellis after the first couple of years. Here's some pictures. Let's go to the next slide, Erica. I'm going to show you guys something. So here is my hop trellis. And when I was doing my original trellis, I had the wind knock down my trellis basically, or disable it. So I went down to the nearest hop farm I could find, and at the time I went to Mount Angel, and I looked at how a commercial hop farm does their trellis, and I saw telephone poles, type poles, and heavy cables, and I realized I needed a serious structure. I get a lot of wind on my property, and a hop trellis can become a big sail and capture a lot of wind. I realized I needed to boost my integrity of my structure. So I cemented my posts, and I also set up a system with these winches, which you see in that picture with my friend Mark, who and my winches allow me to lower and raise my hop trellis. I basically lower it as I harvest. And as we know about fruit trees and other things, the last thing you want to do is have gardeners up on ladders in a safety predicament. So it's really nice to be able to lower these for the harvest, and I only have to do it once a year, but it actually works quite well, and it worked great this past Labor Day. Okay, keep moving. Here are some examples of some home hop trellises. These are just a few. There are many, many on the internet. If you want to look up home hop trellises, you can look all day, because there's all kinds of creative ideas. And my hop trellis, I've never seen anyone do anything like mine with winches, but I've actually had a few different ideas of invention. But basically, how to go 20 feet high and still bring those down for harvest is part of the game. And you'll see on the commercial hop harvest how they do it on their tractors, on these platforms that are raised up, and the various techniques. But so you want to build a hop trellis that's strong, can take the weather, and can also go tall. So some pretty cool pictures. Okay. All right, some notes on this is a picture of a semi-commercial hop farm. You can see these pull. I like this picture because it really showed another serious structure. It uses the commercial binds, using the koi twine, which is the way commercial guys do it. My picture, you'll see I use this rope, which is a natural rope. But these poles are 18 feet tall with 12 feet apart from each other between the rows. They are grown with the rhizomes are kept cool and moist before you plant. Like 8 feet apart, and then you have the plant is on mounds is also a nice way to do it, and they're 2 to 3 feet apart. You want good drainage when you plant your hops. You want to have no standing water. In the beginning, you do light waterings, then you go to 1.5 inches per week. Use drip irrigation or soaker hoses is much better way to do it. And you never want to wet foliage, just as in many gardening situations. Water creates disease on leaves, and hops plants are the same way. Okay, next slide, please. So here's an example of some commercial growing supplies, which can also be used for a home hop growing garden. Oh.
Looks like maybe a technical difficulty on Russ's.
Yeah, I'm here, but I don't.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
And we can still see the PowerPoint also.
Okay. Well, I'll keep talking, even though I can see it on my other screen. So, I am not seeing share screen. Back to me. Oh, there it is. I'm good. Okay. So these growing supplies, basically you have the koi twine on the right. On the left, you have these W clips. They're anchors that are put in the ground to hold the koi twine in the ground. And the commercial growers just leave those W clips in the ground and let them rust after they're done. They don't even pick them up. You can buy these in their bundles of 100 pre-cut strings. A home gardener wouldn't need necessarily 100, but they're very inexpensive. There's a link there for if you want to buy some koi twine, eco-friendly, biodegradable, good old koi twine. I know we use koi for other uses in gardening, but those are some basic supplies. And that middle point there is something you put the W clip in the ground with. There's some basic supplies, but there's lots of stuff out there. The joy of harvest. What could be better than harvesting beer? It hops. So here's my trellis and its glory on the left, and my friends, my neighbor, and my buddies were having a cold one as we share the joy of our harvest. So it's not all work. Okay, we'll keep moving. We got more on the harvest. Here we are in action. We got hop crew. We're having we have a hop picking party every year. Never mind the red cups, but we could get a good crew, and I got a following of people who've been coming and enjoying that. And we put out a nice food spread in about 2 hours, hour and a half. Sometimes we can have that whole trellis harvested with a good crew, and we actually have a good time doing it because when you're picking hops, you can talk and hang out. It's kind of a easy thing to pick and talk and converse and socialize. So it's I got a lot of folks who've been coming many years. Okay, here we are, some more. Here's a bucket full of hops with a friend, and some just having people not minding the work. It's not too hard, and you'll see another picture coming up. Here we go, next one. Okay, well, okay, this here is the a harvested hop. It has a puffed out, it has a soft light feel, very fragrant. Now, Megan loves the fragrance of hops, and that is one of the key things. And if you ever grab a hop cone and put your nose to that, you're gonna see the incredible aroma.
They
So
smell awesome.
yeah, and so anyways, gently squeeze and your nose will know when it's ready. Okay, here we continue. Here are my hop cones harvested, and I use a shade cloths in my greenhouse, and I create hammock kind of set up to dry them. And after about 3 days or so, they're dry and ready to be vacuum sealed and bagged and put in a freezer. But here's some pictures of right after the harvest. Okay. I mentioned earlier how I cut back my root cuttings to the ground, and there is the post-harvest hop trellis. You can also see my ropes and how I have it set up, but it's you know, all done and cleaned up, and it's amazing how it comes back every year so well. So when you store your hops, you want to have them in a low temperature, freezer's great, and a low oxygen environment. Hence, I vacuum seal my hops. If anybody needs some hops, let me know. I have a ample supply to share for friends and neighbors. So my email will be at the end. How to harvest. You 120 days mentioned earlier. We're in a sweet spot for their climate, and I will say that Yakima will stay ahead of the rains, I believe, just as in Napa Valley and other areas that can control the moisture levels with the favorable climate. I think Yakima is able to mid-August to September, they're getting their hops before the water hits. And the last thing you want is a hop cone that has moisture, because that is where the mold can develop, and you want it to be able to dry nicely. That is one of the reasons we'll talk about why New York and some other areas of the country have had problems with their hop agriculture, because I think they get too much unpredictable rain. Okay, so 7 to 10 days is when you want to spend harvesting your hops. You don't want to take that. It's not something you do over time. It's when the hop harvest is there, it's time to get to work and get it done. You can sample the cones from the upper part of the plant. That's where most of the cones develop, on the upper part. Red cones are dry, papery, they sticky with aroma of cut grass or onions, is kind of what they're like, excuse me. And then there's this thing called lupulin, and you saw in that other picture of the yellow kind of the alpha acids are in those small glands that have the hop acids, essential oils. They're fine yellow powder deep in the hop cone. That is the key part of the hop cone for brewing, is the lupulin. Yeah. So the immature cones are soft with pale yellow. You don't want that. They're vegetative aroma, and they're stay too compressed when you squeeze. Overripe ones have an orange lupulin and they're rancid. So you want them just in that sweet spot of where they're ripe. They're not overripe. The first year, you do not cut down the vines until after they die off in the winter. I talked about that earlier. You basically, the first year, do nothing. And then I mentioned earlier, after the mature plants, you can, when you're done with the hop harvest, I cut mine to the ground. Some folks leave them 2 to 3 feet tall, is what I did some reading, but I have no problem cutting them to the ground and putting them mulch over it. You can get about 1 to 2 pounds of cones per mature plant. Okay, next slide. Okay, so when you have harvested hops, you've heard of fresh hop at the breweries. That's you know, a really special beer. Every beer festival in the fall has a fresh hop batch that they make, and it's quite popular. At the same time, there are occasionally people who have tried to make beer with a wet hop that is not dried. Takes an enormous amount of time, not very common, and a challenge. We'll talk a little bit more about beer making without going into too much. Drying hops 3 days under 140 degrees. You mentioned earlier, we can use things like food dehydrators, a low temperature oven, or you can also use something like I do, which is spreading like a screen, or like I use a shade cloth or something that allows them to dry and also get lots of air circulation. When they're dry and ready, you can break the stem and break it in half and see the lupulin in there, and then it falls right out of the cone. It can also tell you they're dry and ready to be stored. When they're not properly dried, guess what? Mold in storage. So you don't want that. I put them in mine in plastic bags. People use jars. I like vacuum sealing, and then freezing is a good choice if you can. Okay. Some of the different ways that hops are made into products are with either loose hop flowers, pellets, or plugs. So you can see in that picture, the plugs are in the middle. That's more of an unusual way to do it. The pellets commonly used for commercial, excuse me, and then there's the flowers. I use mine in flowers, of course. I'm not making any pellets or plugs. Okay, next slide, please. Brew, keg, and enjoy. How simple is that? So there's a couple batches of beer I had going with my little fermenting box. Keep a controlled temperature for my fermentation, and I have a kegerator and in my refrigeration, and there we are on tap. It's just a nice joy. Okay, here we go. Okay, now to a little more about hops and brewing, if you keep you guys awake on this one. So hops, they impart the taste and the aroma in the beer. As I mentioned earlier, you have bittering hops and aroma hops. And there's a term called hop utilization. And that is the percentage of alpha acids isomerized that remain in the finished beer. Isomerized is a term to isomerization, the imparting of the alpha acids into the beer itself during the brew process. And when you're brewing, you get a vigorous boil, and the longer the hops are in the boil, the more bitter the beer can be. A longer wort duration, and wort is the batch of beer that you're brewing before it's a finished fermented product, the wort. And then you have, like I said, more hops. Bitter resins are isomerized during a longer brew. So I found that the water source and the water pH influences fermentation. I won't get into that too much, but all I know is you want good water, and I'll tell you, you don't want any bacteria. You want really good pH balanced water, and you also want a higher pH of for the more quality of the bitterness. When you put the barley malt in, it brings down the pH, and the wort goes to like 5. pH of 5 versus like water, pH balanced water could be 7 or 6.5. So when you add the malt, it lowers the pH. So so a high pH for a wort is actually 5 to 5.5. Okay, next slide. Some other uses of hops beyond beer. Can you imagine that? I know I was asked to do this presentation, and I know there's a lot of folks are like, well, we're gardeners and we don't all make beer, but kind of like wine grapes, hops are primarily for beer, but there are other uses. And some are soaps and fragrances. Megan loves that fragrance of those hop vines, and they are a lovely aroma. They can be used as a mild sedative or used in making soothing teas. They've read there was some candy that people actually made pillows, holiday wreaths, and cloth or paper or some other uses. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Some history of hops in the Yakima Valley. So 1850s, 90% of the U.S. production came from New York. Excuse me. Disease and mold became a problem. And then Prohibition. So New York had its problems. The Puyallup Valley in the 1860s, a guy named Ezra Meeker brings the hop rootstock to Washington. Leaguer did about 500 acres. Then in 1892, this guy had a hop lice disaster, and basically was the end of the Puyallup hop farm demise. Sorry, I mispronounced that. Yakima Valley. In 1872, a gentleman named Charles Carpenter began hop farming. He brought New York cuttings to Yakima Valley, and he got that Yakima Valley started. And then in 1884, the city of Moxie got the Union Gap Canal, and they got water. Speaking of water, one more sip. Excuse me. They basically, having water, were able to really get things going. And by 1890, they had become the hop center for Washington. But all we know, it's an alcohol type business related crop. So Prohibition, followed by the Depression, led to overproduction and very slow times for the Yakima hop industry until 1940 almost. But by 1939, during all that time, they did figure out that only using the seedless hop for the female it was the best way to go. And now those are called Yakima hops. And as I mentioned earlier, the dioecious, that they're either male or female, you only use the female for commercial and for brewing to get the maximum lupulin. So Moxie is now the hop capital of the world, and they have a great annual hop festival every year. I have not been, but I hope to go someday. We have a video to share with you guys. It's a 3 minutes and 45 seconds. It's a nice little summary of commercial hop growing. I think it's kind of fun to share, and I thought we'd just run in and let you guys take a look at that, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. There we go, volume.
I've had the chance to
Can you hear it? Oh, why is
go to
it
Yakima a
stopping?
couple times and
Can you hear it?
experience the hop harvest.
Yeah, yes, I can.
Brewer, there's really nothing
We're going.
like it. Because it only happens once a year, there's just an intensity. The aroma of the hops that's in the air in the entire Yakima Valley is something you just can't really grasp your hands and really understand until you get there. The way that it works is that there are hops growing in many, many different fields, giant plots of different varieties, Cascade, Simcoe, Chinook, Centennial, all kinds of different hop varieties growing. They are strung from the ground to the trellises above. It's about a 20-foot trellis that holds and supports all the hop systems. It's very visually impressive to see the canopies and the rows of hops that come out of the ground. When you're touring the hop fields, you're allowed to walk down the center aisles and just sort of experience what it's like to look at the hops and pluck one off and smell them and sort of check to see how ripe they are, look at the level of readiness for them to be picked. A lot of trucks moving around at that time. The trucks that are cutting the bottom of the system, the top of the system, the guys that are collecting them. They take them back to the hop processing centers. Some of the most interesting pieces of equipment that I've ever seen. There are not much uses for hop processing equipment off season, so these machines really only run for about a 30 to 45 day window. The hops are brought in from the field on about 20-foot strings of rope. They get strung up by one guy out of the back of a truck. They get carried up into this giant infrastructure above the warehouse that they're in, and they at that point are then sent into a processing machine. The processing machine has picking fingers on each side that strip all of the excess material, leaves, etc., things like that off of the hop cones. They go up and over a sequence of tumblers and shakers trying to separate the hop cones, because this is the only piece of thing that matters to a brewer, from all of the other extra material, whether it's rope, parts of the vine, leaves, etc. That's all kind of excess material that you don't want in your kettles and things. Once the hops have gone through the shaking process and have been separated from all of the extra material, they end up in a giant kiln, and the kiln is a slatted floor with propane burners underneath it. At about 4 feet tall, they load in these kilns, and it takes about 24 hours to take the moisture content from anywhere from about 20 to 30% water weight down to about 7 to 10% water weight in the hop cones, and that allows them to then be compressed and baled. And the baling process is how hop buyers receive the hops from the farmers themselves. So the hop bales in burlap bags get compressed in a giant machine, and they get hand stitched shut. Those bales then get sent on a truck, forklifted off the truck for inspection at the hop warehouses. The hop warehouses have a bunch of people running around weighing, measuring, cataloging, pulling samples from, looking at the hops that are coming in and they're receiving them. It's a very impressive process to watch these guys run around, because again, this only takes place in about a 30 to 45 day window. All sorts of stuff going on. Visually, from the hop fields to the hop processing, it's a pretty quick process. The flowers that I'm holding in my hand would have been picked during the day, processed and sent to the hop process, from the hop processor to the hop purveyor in less than 24 hours. So very quickly from the field to the farmer, and from the farmer back to the processor in 24 hours, at which point they are ready to be brewed with and ready to be shipped out.
Okay. Are we back? Are we here?
We are, I just need to reshare.
Okay. Should I open my chat? Let's see.
Oops. Okay.
When you
Oops,
lower
it's wanting to play the video again.
It's a great video, but we'll only watch it once. So
I don't
okay.
know how to get it to stop. Oh, here's. I'm having technical difficulties. I can't advance the slide because when I hit the advance.
I'll just leave it there, I guess, for now. But I see a question. When I lower the hoist and pick the cones, can you not cut back the bines then? Since you said that you post-harvest cut them anywhere from 3 feet down to the ground. I'm wondering if those couldn't be just trimmed then, or it's just cut the bines are intertwined and a nuisance at the time of harvest for the harvest. So when, there we go. You can, the bines are growing this clockwise and they are gripping. Okay, so a commercial grower will use the koi twine and they'll just take their strings basically, and they'll can just strip them. My situation, I got this 1-inch rope, and kind of basically I can take clumps, and we as I lower, just pick right off there, and I'll worry about getting the bines off the rope after I'm done harvesting. But it's basically we're going to cut various groups of the bines and prune that off big clumps, and you can actually sit down and pick your hops off the big clumps of vine that you can remove. And but here's different ways to be resourceful about how to do that. It's it definitely can be a little complex because those bines are gripping those ropes pretty hard, and given the way I do it with the ropes, you're removing them from the ropes. Yes. Okay. Do you have an idea of how much a big wall of hops like yours weighs? Well, actually this year I've had over 30 pounds, and this year I was down to I only got about just over 15 pounds, which I was grateful for because I have plenty of hops. I have over probably a year's worth of home brewing with the amount of harvest I get. And it also depends how social I am and how much brewing production I'm doing. I have not been as social. COVID was a challenge for the hop harvest because I had a lot less beer drinking and a lot less social, and therefore inventory was up. Okay, question. I brew with pellets, not cones. What is extracted from the cones to make the pellets? That's a good question. They're compressed, basically, my understanding. I've not actually looked into exactly how the pellet production is done, but I know it's basically the compressed cone. And how they compress it into pellet, I probably could look that up, but I know it's definitely a compression system. Says, I do not drink alcoholic beverages. Perhaps I could make non-alcoholic beer. How can you do that? Well, I would call that a hop tea. And you might want to play around with that. Sorry to say, I have not made a non-alcoholic hop beverage, but I could see that becoming a tea as long as you don't pitch yeast into that, and you have to watch out for how long you could store it also. But I would say you're creating a tea is my guess, even though I don't have an expertise in that. Okay. Any other questions? Let's see. Looks like we're caught up. If anybody wants to come over Labor Day, come on over. Labor Day every year, I do my hop picking barbecue. It is open to anyone who wants to come. And there's my email. All right.
We will look forward to that next year, Russ. Thank you.
All
This
right.
was really interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. I'll make this recording available hopefully in the next couple of days on our website. Thanks,
Very
and have
good.
a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.